Welcome to Canadian Innovators, the show that celebrates innovation, entrepreneurs, and the Canadian spirit. I'm Jocelyn, and every week we introduce a new entrepreneur or expert on the economy to tell their stories and unpack the challenges of keeping jobs in Canada, as well as to discuss potential solutions for job growth and prosperity. Today on the program, we're talking about the energy crisis. It's not just filling up the pumps that has become overwhelming. It's every aspect of our lives. Transportation cost is skyrocketing, and this impacts everything we buy. Manufacturing has been hit particularly hard because unaffordable energy impacts manufacturing affordability. And not only does that get passed on to the consumer, but it impacts our ability to compete globally. Today, we're going to discuss the federal government's policy on energy and how the Trudeau government energy policy has impacted small to medium-sized business. For the past 3 years, former federal Liberal cabinet minister Dan McTeague has been sounding the alarm on the damaging effects of poor energy policy on the Canadian economy, both for the consumer and for the manufacturing community. Dan McTeague is now president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. An 18-year veteran of the House of Commons, Dan is widely known in both official languages for his tireless work on energy pricing and saving Canadians money through accurate pricing forecasts. His parliamentary initiatives were aimed at helping Canadians cope with affordable energy costs and led to providing Canadians with heating fuel rebates on at least 2 occasions. Welcome to the program, Dan.
Jocelyn, that's quite an introduction. Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
Well, you have been a tireless warrior for affordable energy. Dan, the federal Liberals of yesteryear are not the Liberals of today, don't you think?
No, not at all. I mean, Liberal in name only, but as far as other policies are concerned, anything but. And certainly given, I think, to the latest trends on whatever works, cancel culture on the social side, virtue signaling on the political side, and of course, on the economic side, nothing short of having bought the climate agenda lock, stock, and barrel to the detriment of Canadians and our state of well-being.
Now, Dan, I full disclosure, was in your riding in Scarborough, and I met you when you were a politician, and I got to say, you were very hard not to like. You were really there for your constituents, but what pulled you into politics?
I think it was the desire to try to help people and bring different perspectives. I always thought politicians and politics and the political process really dealt with, large issues of the day, and a lot of stuff got forgotten. The things that concern people were often not heard or at least addressed by all politicians, and more often than not, partisanship had a lot more to do with the cut and thrust of representation. I thought there had to be a more middle ground approach that wasn't something like what the Reform or others had talked about, where the constituents are 100% and you do referendums every 30 seconds. I thought there was a way for the parliamentarian to, in fact, be an appropriate delegate for the riding and to speak up on issues that often got forgotten. And so I spent a considerable amount of my time as a member of Parliament picking up on issues that never made it to the floor of the House of Commons in the past. And thankfully, we did have a democratic system. And if your issue was strong enough and powerful enough, you could make a difference. And so that's what attracted me to the time. The Liberal Party was the vehicle of the center at the time. It's no longer, of course. It's gone hard, radical, far left. But and it also, at some point, prized independence of thought and the ability to articulate, as long as it wasn't meant to be disrespectful or to try to bring the whole system down. At the end of the day, it was a party that was very open and very much centrist and tried to provide something we have never heard in our politics, certainly in the past 7 years with the Trudeau government, strive for consensus.
Now, Dan, in the minute we have left before we go to break, you've been sounding the alarm for the past 3 years. Tell us what's happening with energy policy in just about 30 seconds, and we'll pick it up after the break.
Canada is one of the largest energy producers in the world, provable, desirable. 200 years of natural gas we could supply to the rest of the world. We've decided to forego that in favor of some ideas that we could somehow get rid of our products and that our products are very bad. And as a result, not only is the world denied an opportunity to get that fuel, Canadians are suffering both in terms of weak Canadian dollar and much higher unaffordable energy prices, now leading to pretty much everything in the throughout our economy.
So we're going to take a quick break. You're watching Canadian Innovators. Don't go away. We'll be right back with Dan McTeague. Welcome back. You're watching Canadian Innovators. Joining me today is Dan McTeague, President, Canadians for Affordable Energy, and we're discussing the Canadian energy crisis. Dan, let's unpack how we got here today with energy prices. Can you walk us through how we got here?
Yeah, so look, everyone knows the pandemic brought about demand destruction in terms of energy use and consumption. All of us were pretty much locked up at home for an extended period of time, on and off, going back to, the beginning of March 2020. What has brought us here to these unprecedented prices isn't so much a massive, rapid, increase in demand for products, which can be expected after 2 years of being out of commission, but in fact, supply constraints. And those supply constraints in terms of oil, in terms of natural gas, in terms of refinery production of both things like diesel, jet fuel, and of course, gasoline and all of its derivative products, is very much a result of a constraint in supply. And you'd have to sort of go back a few years from there when we had mandates by capitalists, by Wall Street, and by, to a lesser extent, Bay Street, saying no more investment in fossil fuels or reduce your footprint. This fanaticism over climate really pervaded the ability for the country to attract investments to replace the barrels of fuel that we're using now. And so we found ourselves in a situation of globally, a bit of tightness in supply. Europe and other nations went even further by saying absolutely no more coal, no more natural gas, no more oil. We'll rely on solar panels and wind. In the case of Canada, we said no more pipelines. And that's critical. And we'll talk about that a little later. But when you lose what is the ability to put out 2 to 3 million barrels into the world market by killing, the Energy East pipeline, the Northern Gateway pipeline, fooling around with the TMX pipeline, such that you expose consumers and taxpayers to billions of dollars in risks that would have otherwise been taken by the private sector. At a time in which the world needs more oil, Canada could have provided, having the third largest provable reserves in the world. We lost an opportunity, and we did so deliberately.
Yeah, it is stunning how forces outside of Canada got our banks, financial institutions, and our large corporations to basically declare war on our resource sector. It's just astounding. Dan, how has the war in Ukraine finally woken people up to the importance of fossil fuels in our lives?
Well, I had predicted for some time that we would see $2 a liter around this time. My good friend David Booth, who I'd worked with many years ago in my days where I worked at public relations for Toyota Canada Lexus, did a story about a year and a half ago saying this is how we're going to get to $2 a liter. And it wouldn't have taken Russia's invasion of Ukraine to bring us there. But make no mistake, Canada's inability to get and we have a much larger reserve than Russia does. They're number 8, we're number 3. Last time in math, that means we're ahead of them. Our inability to get product to market in places like Europe means that they became ever more reliant on Russia and more dependent on Russia to make their economies run. And so they're, in fact, funding Vladimir Putin to do whatever he wants. And his design is to recreate the old former Soviet Union, grab the Donbass, take whatever he can with relative impunity, with Europe basically on bended knee, not able to fight back. And of course, Canada, despite all the comments from its Minister of Natural Resources, which is frankly pathetic, only wants to talk about windmills and solar panels, not what the world needs: Canadian natural gas, Canadian oil. And so what this has done is exposed, I think, for many Canadians that this green fantasy is by far and away not a free ride. More importantly, it's created global security risk on a scale this generation has never experienced. Well done, Trudeau. Well done, Canada.
Yeah, it's astounding. Dan, the Justin Trudeau government doesn't seem to be fussed about energy costs. It seems like they think this is the price we need to pay to get to the Green New Deal. What are your thoughts on all of this? It's like they're saying, let them eat cake.
Yeah, well, fanaticism has its cost, and people should be concerned that climate bedwetters are running basically the country amok. And we have now found ourselves in a situation where many people are having to choose between eating and feeding and heating. And the reality is that for many, when you have a government saying not enough, let's do more, you kind of have to wonder At what point democratically does the will of the population start to kick in? Well, hang on a second. He's jumped in bed with the NDP or vice versa, and the NDP is prepared to double down on the pain they're inflicting on Canadians. So, look, it's easy to say, I told you once in 2015, I told you twice in 2019, I told you three times in 2021, but you cheerfully voted for the NDP and the Liberals. And as a result, you have a situation in this country in which people are staring down the prospects, not only of the higher cost of living, which many cannot afford, but now higher interest rates in response to those higher energy prices, which are driving the inflationary spiral. Worse, because we've decided, we don't want to sell any more oil or gas, one of our most important exports, and by number, probably our biggest. Because we're no longer doing that, the Canadian dollar suffers. We're losing 30% in our purchasing power for everything, folks. Commodities are all in US dollars.
Welcome back. My guest today is Dan McTeague, President, Canadians for Affordable Energy, and we're discussing the energy crisis in Canada. And Dan is giving us his unambiguous feedback, as only Dan can. Dan, our second largest GDP contributor is manufacturing and third is energy. Now, you think that that's even bigger than what StatsCan's reporting, but these two are linked. And many Canadians just don't understand the link between the resource sector and manufacturing sector. Let's talk about how an attack on one is an attack on the other. How do you see it, Dan?
Energy is embedded in everything that we do, everything we use, everything we consume, everything that we need to make a modern economy not only functional, but affordable. And at the same time, we can share in this prosperity. Think, for instance, of the $20 to $25 billion the oil and gas sector creates in revenues for the federal, provincial, and even municipal governments. We won't talk about municipal governments biting the hand that feeds them, saying we can get rid of natural gas plants here in my province of Ontario, which of course would leave us with blackouts. It is something that I think we simply tend to fail to understand. While the number one industry may look like real estate and services, we'll see how that works out over the next couple of months. I think that's dropping like a stone. And that has a lot to do with the same policies pursued by the Bank of Canada, pursued by others, elites, and call them what you will, opinion leaders that say, oh, we have to shut down the economy in order to meet our climate goals. Climate goals that don't even give Canada credit were it able to sell natural gas to countries like India and China, who are otherwise going to pollute the world. We call carbon pollution with even greater emissions using coal. So it makes no sense. We live in a bizarre world. Unfortunately, the Trudeau government has us living in a world of magic and make-believe. But for most people, reality is going to hit them hard.
Yeah, and when Canada contributes less than 1.6% of the world's GHGs, and we're just tanking our economy for it. Dan, carbon tax, clean fuel standards, and all of the other gas taxes, death by 1,000 cuts for the consumer and the manufacturer. And Canada is the only G7 country not cutting the fuel tax. Why are the Liberals so stubbornly refusing to provide tax relief for Canadians?
Look, the world could see Canada produce a lot more of its energy and bring down those so-called emissions. But we have a government that says, hey, we want not only one carbon tax, which will triple to about 35 cents a liter in diesel, which, by the way, that's why BC pays $2.30 a liter when the rest of us are paying $2.05 and $2.10. The second carbon tax will kick in. It may not be overnight, but in July, so in a few weeks from now, the Liberal government will, in a very quiet, sneaky way, put it in place, the second gazetting, or Gazette 2, as they call it. And what that will do is require all emitters to reduce intensity of carbon emissions. And what that is going to ultimately mean by 2024, 2025, beginning that time to 2030, probably an additional 20 cents a liter, because you have to go to a carbon credit market. God knows how that's regulated. But in any event, what this really means is that it is not only the death of our ability to make ends meet, it is very much the end of Canada as an energy provider, because we're putting all our eggs in one basket. We believe we can do all that electrification by 2030. It's unrealistic. It doesn't work in Europe. It caused a war in Europe, but the Canadian government and its following believe that's the way we have to go. It's insane.
It truly is. And you wonder what people are thinking. But Dan, let's talk about C11. Not only does the federal government want to take down the resource and manufacturing sector, but they don't want you talking about it. How will this bill affect the work that you do?
Well, I'm sure they don't like what I have to say. And what I have to say is contrary to public opinion, contrary to their objectives to shut down debate on something as controversial and unsettled as the science that they have to back up these obtuse and very arbitrary and damaging taxes, much less the policies that go behind it. Then I suspect that our ability to speak out and to speak up in our democracy is lessened. I suspect that this is not just about turning your back, walking away from consensus, not being able to stand up to a good debate, which Trudeau and his gang cannot, because I know most of them personally. And it's time for Canadians to demand an election and to have these people removed.
Yeah, and we could be such a great country if we only had the political will to do so. We need the citizens to step up. But we're going to take a quick break. You're watching Canadian Innovators. We'll be right back.
Canadian Justice is a show about some of the most interesting and controversial legal cases in Canada. Canadians really need to be concerned with protecting our fundamental freedoms.
We need to see our members of parliament show solidarity.
Other people who targeted us were able to amplify their voices.
I hope that this program gets people thinking about how legal issues can impact their everyday life.
This is fundamentally discriminatory.
We are relational beings. We are spiritual beings. We're social beings.
And remember, a freer Canada starts with you.
We're back. Joining me today is Dan McTeague, President, Canadians for Affordable Energy, and we're talking about the federal government energy policy. So, Dan, this is the part of my show every week. I ask my guests if they were a politician, what 3 things would they do to grow jobs and the economy? And Dan, you are in a great position because you were a cabinet minister. If you were back in the job today, you're in the hot seat. What would you do?
Build pipelines, period. They're pipelines. Look, this country needs to get its resources to market. And anybody standing in the way of that should either have their day in court, but after it's over, stand aside, or have the military or security forces remove them. We cannot tolerate a country having its bounty tied up by a handful of fanatics who believe that the world is coming to an end in 10 years. And by the way, I go back to 1978 in the Liberal Party. So I know the Morris Strongs who ran as a candidate in the 1978 by-election, and I know, and 79, and I know the Stéphane Dion's, and I know all of these people over the years who've always said the world is coming to an end. It's not. Leave the world alone. Start building pipelines. Let's get Canada back on track. And by the way, anybody thinks we're not clean, I'll put our energy sector and our ability to do things up against any other nation in this world. And I will tell you, we will always come on top because we understand our responsibilities. Unfortunately, too many stunned Canadians don't. And I call them that because we're being ignorant to what we're doing. We've done great things on the environmental front. We've been doing it for hundreds of years, long before it's trendy, long before we needed a carbon tax to tell us.
Well, Dan, that's absolutely true. And I do lay some of that blame on our energy companies that don't seem to be able to tell their great stories. But Dan, the Enbridge Line 5, which Michigan Governor Elizabeth Whitmer is still threatening to shut down, is still percolating. What would the impacts of this be on Canada? What's your prediction of what's going to happen with Line 5?
Well, it would shut down, of course, Ontario and Quebec's economy. You'd have no propane. You'd have 50, 60% of all your energy needs circumvented. Shut down your plastics, your ethylene, your PPEs, everything you make that you take for granted. The industrial heartland of the country would suffer a fatal blow. And of course, it would take Michigan with it. Sideswipe Ohio, Pennsylvania to a lesser extent. So I have some experience with this in 2016, 2017, my old work in the United States. Many of the emergency prepared managers for various states, those ones around Ontario, were appalled at the fact that Canada had no response to the threat by Dan Issel, who, of course, is the Attorney General, and later on Gretchen Whitmer, who were serious about closing that pipeline down. I think the simple answer is not just a tit for tat. We need to take this very seriously. We need to make sure that this pipeline doesn't get shut down. But if it does, those contingencies have to be in place. One of the most important was, one, reopen Energy East pipeline immediately. That should have been part of my last segment in terms of a recommendation. At the end of the day, as our good friend Parker Gallant has pointed out many times, it's a two-way street. You shut our pipeline, we shut off your electricity.
Yeah, absolutely. Dan, I can't let you go without asking about the latest scandal to rock Justin Trudeau's government and the RCMP seeming to collude to use the Nova Scotia gun tragedy to push the government's gun agenda. Will this scandal be the tipping point? What's your prediction?
Well, I think it is with Canadians, those who are paying attention, but it looks like it's now having an effect on the elites, on the opinion leaders that I mentioned earlier. I think finally, when you're starting to see people like Chantal Hébert and Campbell Clark and others of the Globe and Mail starting to scratch their head and wonder what's going on, you know that the days are numbered for Justin Trudeau. He's going to fight back because he has a caucus that he handpicked, so they wouldn't fight him. They won't say anything. They're all muzzled. They're all good, followers. But at the end of all this, I think the writing is going to become very quickly on the wall. Maybe Jagmeet Singh can buy a spine and realize that there's an opportunity for him there. Jack Layton did it many years ago. Maybe there's something in there for him as well. But I think time is up for the Justin Trudeau Liberals, and perhaps a new day will dawn. One can only hope.
One can only hope. We need to get this country back on track. Dan, thanks for joining me for these important discussions. Just fascinating conversation. And we're going to have you back again for round two shortly.
Looking forward to that, Jocelyn. Thanks for having me.
Well, that's all the time we have today. Thanks for my guest, Dan McTeague, former Liberal Cabinet Minister and President of Canadians for Affordable Energy. Affordable energy is the cornerstone to Canadian prosperity, and Canada is blessed to have an abundance of natural resources. We need to get on with developing them and get them to market. I'm Jocelyn Bamford. Thank you for watching Canadian Innovators. If you're an innovator, tell us your story. Write to us at CanadianInnovators@thenewsforum.ca, and we'll see you next time.